Chapter 11. Gremlin. Word reached me that people were seeing strange things during flights. Other pilots started blaming any airborne mechanical failures on these monsters. They were small skinny people with no eyes, the story said. The times and places of these monsters' sightings were all over the place, and at first the target seemed indiscriminate, but I changed my thinking as stories of this monster began focusing in on me, until the Royal Aero Club's own Jim Graham came in shouting, "I saw it! It was clinging to the underside of my plane! Look!" he added, slapping the side of the plane he'd just landed, a French-born beauty named Simone. It was a Blériot 11 monoplane with two wheels under the main wing and one under the tail, and the panel between the front wheels was hanging open. The engine was visible inside that square hole, and 2 or 3 screws near the cylinder had come loose and fallen out. "See? I thought the engine was making a terrible racket, and this is why," Jim said, quite beside himself. He explained that he'd seen a tiny eyeless creature, maybe 50 centimetres tall, scrabbling about under his plane doing something. 50 centimetres. That was far smaller than I'd imagined. "Nah, it didn't look like a Spaniard at all. No way that thing was human. All its teeth were sharpened, and its claws were long and pointy, and it kept grinning at me like it knew I couldn't do anything. It kept messing about down there, and then the engine started acting funny, and I about shit myself. I turned and came straight back here before that thing made me crash, but it must have dropped off somewhere." Jim began carrying a pistol with him whenever he flew, but he never saw the monster again. People began saying the pistol kept it away and imitating him, but I wasn't so sure. I wanted to prove it was real before I banished it, prove it was the same eyeless thing that had shown up at the Multirise manor. So I started bringing a camera into my cockpit, a boxy camera made by Kodak called the Brownie. If anything happened, I would take a snapshot, and if I got a photo, I planned to visit the manor again and get Faraday to verify it. But before that happened, I got a photo of something else. I was trying to photograph J.G. Rowland's stunt flying, and as he turned his Leslie upside down, I saw the silhouette of a plane through a gap in the clouds far behind him. When I showed the photo around, nobody in the club had ever seen anything like it, but I was pretty sure I had. I knew I'd seen it somewhere, but I couldn't quite remember where, until one day the dots finally connected. I'd never seen the plane itself. I'd only seen the schematics for it, when it was just a dream, a scribbling in his notes in the Multirise shed. Yes, it was Stephen's motorising. Stephen was supposed to be in France, so why was he flying close to the Dover coast? If he'd flown all the way from France, this wasn't a public flight. This wasn't an era where just anyone could cross country lines whenever they liked. Was he flying home from France? But if he was flying back from France on a plane of his own design, people would be talking about it, and word would have reached us. To begin with, I'd no idea what Stephen was even doing in France. France and England had never really got along, but 8 years ago they'd signed a trade agreement, and travel between the two countries was quite common. I had a lot of pilot friends in France, but none of them had ever heard of Stephen, and none of the airplane makers have heard of him either. It was still a very small industry, so if he was openly involved in it, I would almost certainly have heard something about him. So he mustn't be openly involved, I guess. He was flying his plane in secret, his own original creation. It cost money to make an airplane, so that must be coming from the Multirise coffers. Since Darlington was clearly becoming the official heir, she should be aware of what Stephen was up to. With that thought in mind, I visited the Multirise home for the first time in 5 years. After the Kenton murder case round up impossible to prosecute further, Ben Multirise lost all appetite for business. He'd more or less withdrawn from it and had retired to a resort town in America called Miami. Darlington was running the estate and the business all by herself. She'd become even more beautiful and even more imposing. When I showed her the photo I'd taken, she grimaced. "So? Tell me what Stephen's doing." "Don't tell me this plane isn't funded with Multirise money, and I highly doubt Multirise money is funding anything you don't know about." "You've really grown a backbone, Jorge Joestar." "Thanks," I said, certain now that I was right. Darlington was buying herself time to think about what she should tell me, which meant she knew something. Ignoring her attempts to deflect, I pushed for an answer. "I know a lot about planes, and I know this is the Multirising Stephen was designing. The most distinctive aspect is this single-seat design. It looks like a two-seater, but it isn't. He designed it this way so he can easily fly back to the cockpit if he has to jump out of the plane for any reason. This gives him somewhere to fold his wings. No other plane would need the like. Darlington stared silently at me for a while, but at last she said, "Why today?" But it sounded like she was talking to herself, and before I could try to say anything, she said something that came as a complete surprise to me. "George, do you think it's possible for the dead to come back to life?" What? Was she deflecting again? But then, I don't even need to think about it. It's not possible. I was lying. I knew the truth. Some dead became zombies. But that wasn't coming back to life again. That was the dead acting as if they were alive, drinking human blood and devouring human flesh. A shiver ran down my spine. A flavour of fear I hadn't felt in some time. I thought I'd left all that behind me on the Canary Islands. I did my best to keep it from showing. Darlington stared at me intently for another minute, then said, "Yes, but not everyone thinks that way, and there are cultural and religious precedents. Jesus Christ resurrected 3 days after being crucified. People all across the world believed that was true." "What do you mean by this? Does Stephen believe this is possible?" "I don't know, but my father and Stephen are betting on that possibility. They want Kenton back." "But how?" "While you were studying planes, Stephen and my father have been studying ways to bring back the dead, and I found a place in South America that had stories about it, and found some sort of proof that some ritual had actually given life to the dead." "They did?" "A folk religion called voodoo. They have a kind of sorcerer called a Bokor, who's set to chant a spell that causes the dead to rise to their feet. Though still dead, they stand. They call these undead zombies." "Zombies?" This was starting to sound a lot like what Strait had told me. "It was slaves that brought voodoo to America originally," Darlington continued. "It seems to have started as a religion on the African continent, but South America is a strange land, and parts of the continent have their own legends of the dead coming back. The Aztecs believed that the dead would become their king. George, have you heard of the stone mask?" This caught me off guard, and I stuttered. "What? The stone mask? What stone mask?" "A tool used to turn the Aztec king into the living dead. We've learned that your father Jonathan spent quite some time studying the mask. It was a long time ago now, but my father once visited your home and remembers seeing the mask hanging on the wall in the parlour." I couldn't keep feigning innocence. I stopped protesting and simply waited to see where Darlington's story would take us. She pressed on towards the heart of the matter. "That parlour burned with the rest of the Joestar mansion in the Great Fire 24 years ago. But do you know what happened in that house the night of the fire?" Darlington didn't wait for me to answer. "Your grandfather, also named Jorge Joestar, gathered a bunch of policemen to arrest his adopted son, Dio Brando, who was trying to murder him. They all died, but they weren't burned to death. Not one person there died in the fire. All the policemen were murdered before the fire began, in the most horrible, horrific manner possible. We've obtained a copy of the police report describing the condition of the bodies. Their arms and legs were torn off, their heads split in half. One of the policemen had 2 holes in his head, as if 2 fingers had punctured his skull." Hold on a second. There. Right. B. Anyway, Darlington may not have noticed, but even I didn't know the story in that much detail. All I knew was that Dio Brando had put the mask on, murdered my grandfather, and when blood hit the mask, he turned into a vampire and slaughtered the cops. "Part of the Joestar mansion that survived the fire had similar round holes on the ceiling, and on the wall 2 rows of parallel holes like someone had walked straight up the wall, smashing their feet through it with every step. That night, 24 years ago, something was in the Joestar mansion, something with unnatural power, and we know that the Aztec kings had similar inhuman power. The stone mask links Aztec legends in the Joestar mansion, and ties both to a third place, a town in the valley known as Wind Knight's Lot." By this point, I couldn't help but be impressed. She'd done her homework well. "That town was wiped out in a single night. The only survivors were a young girl and her brother. It seems someone swore them to secrecy. There should have been bodies everywhere, but they were all taken away by some powerful group. Stephen and my father managed to get those 2 survivors to tell everything. They tried money at first, But apparently using Brando's name and showing them a photograph of him was far more effective. The sister told them the truth. Brando came to that town and turned everyone there into the living dead. Darlington had stepped right into the heart of the matter, and she kept on walking. And then their gaze turned towards the ship that sank while your parents were on their honeymoon. They investigated. They wanted to find the ship's wreck but couldn't find it anywhere, so all they could do was check the records from the port it left from. They found one suspicious piece of cargo, a large box, and the owner's name was listed only as DB. One of the dock workers who helped carry the box on board told him it was a big sturdy black box that looked like a coffin, and another dock worker told them that he'd heard a voice from inside it. George, we know when your mother was rescued by Canary Island fishermen, she was afloat on a large box that looked very like a coffin. And George, I'm sure you know how Stephen and your father came by that statement. They went to La Palma in the Canary Islands and learned more than the history of your family. They found 73 people had died in the church in 1905. And that evening, a mysterious group had declared curfew on the island, essentially declaring martial law. Stephen and Father investigated further and found the same group had come to the island 5 years earlier and done the same thing, doing something so terrifying the islanders refused to speak of it at all. George, I'm sure you remember this. The incident with the Torres family? Alejandro Torres came to your school looking young, walking on the ceiling with large fangs sticking out of his mouth. And the ones who defeated this monster were you and the girl who'd been living with you, Elizabeth Strait. 5 years later, on the second night of horror, she worked with that group and left the Joestar home for good. After that, we were unable to trace her movements, but she was always with you when you needed her. Any time you were in trouble, she would come. Right? She even stayed in the Westwood jail with you. I really didn't expect her to know that. How? I'm the one who tracked that lead down. Had to use a photo of Elizabeth Strait in grade school. Even as a kid she was a beauty, very mature looking. When I showed it to the police officers, they all acted like they'd been struck by lightning. Their eyes went blank and they passed out. She left them seriously damaged. I've no idea what she could have done to knock out all those men, but several of them definitely remembered seeing Elizabeth, seeing her walking freely in and out of the jail. The police officers themselves had no idea how or why she was able to do that, but I think you know, George. It's obvious she was only there because you were. She saw through everything. Embarrassment threatened to turn my face red, but I desperately tried to keep my poker face going. I understand now why you never showed interest in other girls, George, Darlington said. A girl that impressive already had you locked up. Your feelings, your heart, your very body. She's got them all tamed. She's trained you so well you'd never even consider cheating on her. She has. The look on my face must have been a sight, because Darlington burst out laughing. Sorry, I just couldn't resist. No, I think the truth is, very few girls can live up to someone so beautiful and amazing. Oh. Wait, what are we talking about? My point is, Darlington said, getting back on track, my father and brother are so desperate to bring my sister back to life that they've gone a bit too far. The Aztec legends, the stone mask, the incident at the Joestar mansion, and Elizabeth Strait herself have all led them to finding the group she works with. Today I just received word from Stephen. Stephen thinks I agree with what they're doing, but I don't. I mean, she was my sister, and it was a great tragedy, but dead is dead. Stephen's crime won't vanish if he brings her back, and now that she's dead, even if Kenton comes back to life, there's no guarantee she'll be the same Kenton we once knew. Especially given the Aztec legends and everything that happened with Brando, which suggests that all this will lead to nothing but sadness and horror. It would. Lisa and the rest of them were fighting every day to prevent that. What Stephen's trying to do, I said, will almost certainly not pay for his sins or honour Kenton's memory. I remembered what my mother had said 7 years ago on La Palma, that this story concerned not just the Joestar family, but all mankind. Wind Knight's lot may be a small country town, but even then the reason almost everyone had been turned into a zombie in a single night was because once a zombie drank your blood or ate your flesh, you turned into a zombie too. And that infection spread with terrifying speed. That was the reason the Hamon masters had ordered the villagers not to leave their homes when the Antonio Torres incident was going down. Tell me, George, what should I do? My family have lost their minds and I can't stop them. I hate to say it, but most of the Multirise fortune is under their control, and I can't stop them using it how they please. I'll start by contacting Elizabeth Strait. I'll warn her about what's going on here, and I'll ask her to take care of your father and Stephen gently. Don't worry, Darlington. How can I put this? Elizabeth Strait, the group Elizabeth Strait is with is made up entirely of amazing people, and they're all people you can trust. I'm sure they'll be able to help your father and Stephen see reason. Really? Are you sure, George? They won't let Kenton turn into a zombie? I'm sure. Even if she did turn into a zombie, Lisa would destroy her in the blink of an eye. You don't need to be scared of anything like that. A shudder ran over Darlington and she burst into tears. Thank God! I was so scared I can't tell you how much. I considered putting my arms around her suddenly frail-looking shoulders, but decided against it, striking a cheerful tone. Haha, what a coincidence I happened to take a picture of Stephen's plane and stop by just in time. Why today? Darlington had said. But wasn't it a good thing I'd come today? That's not what I meant, Darlington said, but before she could say anything else, a car pulled up out front, and when she saw it, she hastily wiped her tears. A tall man got out of the car, greeted Faraday, and strolled into the house as if he owned the place, calling out, I'm home, da. Home? Da? I thought only Stephen and Kenton called it that. Let me introduce you, George, Darlington said, smiling, and rising to greet the man coming down the hall and making his leather boots squeak loudly on the hardwood floor. Oh, da! I went to put a bouquet on the cliff tops. Say a prayer and let your mother know our good news, he said as he stepped in. He was a rather handsome man, of a significantly more impressive build than my own, and I was instantly in a bad mood. Was this because I had already guessed who he must be? Oh, we have company? I do apologise, he said with a pleasant smile I found infuriating. William, this is Jorge Joestar, Darlington said. George, this is my fiancé, William Cardinal. Cardinal's eyes went wide. Then he smiled broadly and held out his hand. Oh, you're Mr. Jorge Joestar. Well met, sir. What brings you here today? I had nothing to say to him. I heard of your engagement and came to congratulate you both. Congratulations, I said, and shook his big, thick hand. Oh, well, thank you very much. With the handshake complete, neither one of us said another word. We both knew already we had nothing to say to each other. George, thank you very much for coming, Darlington said, breaking the silence. I'll see you to the door. Darlington went out in the hall, and Cardinal came with us, apparently not needing an invitation. George, you'll come to our wedding, won't you? Sorry, but I think I'd better not. Given my history with this family, I doubt I'd be very welcome. True enough, Cardinal chuckled. I cringed, but whatever. I greeted Faraday at the door, and as I stepped outside, Cardinal said, Since you said it first, you do tend to be a bad influence here. Could I ask that you not ever visit here again? We've got enough work today rebuilding the Multirise name, and as grateful as Dar is for your friendship, from this point on, we've got to do this as a couple, see? I turned around and looked at Darlington, but she wouldn't meet my eye. All the power I'd felt from her when I'd arrived had vanished into thin air, and she was dithering like someone else entirely. Cardinal put his hand on her shoulders and said, Right, Dar? What's wrong? You seem out of it. Are you tired? Get it together. Then Darlington said, Oh, sorry, and smiled and got it together. Thank you for everything, George. Both our houses have seen too much tragedy, but personally you'll still have my trust. Goodbye, Jorge Joestar. Give my best wishes to your family. Her words sounded like the air to the house, but the strength had left her eyes. But I said nothing. It was her family and her life. I gave a quick wave and left the Multirise manor. I went home, called Mother at work, and had her contact Lisa. About 10 minutes later, the phone rang. Lisa wouldn't tell me where she was, but I told her what Darlington had told me. I don't know anything about this man, Cardinal, but we're already watching the Multirise men. It'll be fine. Frankly, the fact he has his own airplane design might come in handy. George, it's still a ways off, but war is coming. Yeah, the RIC's been working with the Navy, and soon enough they'll officially be the Navy's airborne division. Don't die, okay? I won't, I said. Planes won't be used for anything but scouting anyway, and how exactly are they going to knock us out of the sky? Only way we'll crash is sloppy maintenance. Shortly after that, the English Royal Flying Corps was officially created, and I joined the Royal Naval Air Service. While learning how to fly a hydroplane, I took part in training on how to take off and land from the deck of a new type of warship, which I thought went pretty well. Once I put my hands on the flight stick, I stopped thinking about anything complicated or difficult and focused. Being dumb was a great help, but while plenty of guys could take off and land on a ship at harbour, the only pilots who could do that from the deck of an aircraft carrier sailing across the ocean were me and Jim Graham. So I was just thinking that aircraft carriers weren't going to be all that useful when the world went to war. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire's throne was killed by a Serbian, and they declared war against Serbia. Germany and Austria had joined the Triple Alliance, and while dealing with Serbia also invaded Belgium, intent on swiftly taking down France. But since they'd already attacked a neutral country, England also joined the war, and since Russia mobilised far faster than expected, Germany demanded that Austria deal with the Russian assault, and Austria plunged into chaos. The third member of the Triple Alliance, Italy, initially ignored Austria's territorial dispute before eventually joining England and France. At the same time, the Ottoman Empire, itself locked in a territorial dispute with Russia, threw in with Germany and Austria, and since Japan and England had signed a treaty, Japan joined the war, and the British Empire's territories of Canada, Australia and New Zealand all pitched in, and quite literally the whole world was now mixed up in it. So I fought too. The main duty of the Royal Naval Air Service was finding enemy ships and submarines, and at first we flew hydroplanes in pairs watching the English Channel, but since Jim and I could take off and land on an aircraft carrier, we got moved to the Great Wide North Open Sea. For the first 2 weeks I was partnered with a navigator named Frank Damaris, but he kept muttering, "It's your fault, I'm risking my life," over my shoulder the whole time he flew, and eventually he got to me and I punched him the moment we landed and fired his ass. Frank seemed grateful though. Certainly there were a hell of a lot more enemy ships, but finding them saved a lot of English lives. The ship's guns almost never hit, and compared to the trench warfare the army was bogged down in, we got to be up in the sky and free and enjoy ourselves. So what the hell was so damn scary, I thought. But fine, he was scared, and I couldn't be bothered getting another navigator. So I started flying alone and doing some pretty crazy shit. I piled bombs in Frank's empty seat, and used them to bombard German ships from the air. I knew they were actively developing proper bombing equipment, but until that reached me I wanted to do what I could. Unless you did something really stupid, planes weren't about to get hit by any ships, and from the sky battleships looked super unprotected. So I tried tossing bombs out of the plane as I flew over them, and like I expected they hit and I was officially getting results. I was pleased. It was much better to have me blow them up than having English ships fight them head on with lots of casualties. Jim disagreed. "We should just do what we're told to do. If we fly right over a battleship, we're much more likely to get shot down, and it's no glory in death." That way of thinking was kinda shitty, considering we'd already earned a relatively safe job flying planes. I said as much, and Jim and I had the flight we'd never quite got around to before the war started. I mean, Jim didn't say that shit lightly, and only felt comfortable speaking his mind on the matter because it was me he was talking to. But it still felt cowardly to think like that, considering all the other English soldiers out fighting for England right now. If we weren't motivated to protect people, we'd never make it through this war, I thought. I felt pretty smug about it, but a single bullet ended that. Bang! I was flying Starshooter, a hydroplane I'd made a few modifications to, and there was now a hole open in the right side of it. I stared at it, confused. How had I been shot from the side? Had Jim finally snapped and turned that pistol of his on me? I looked to my right, and saw a German Albatross headed right towards me. Machine gun barrels on both sides of the body spit fire again. They hit. Not me, but Jim's Simone hydroplane. He'd been just above me on my left, saw the Albatross attacking before I did, and tried to gain some distance. His wings had gone diagonal, and a hail of bullets licked the length of them. The body broke in half before the wings broke up, cracking like an egg and dropping Jim like a yolk towards the ocean below. So I quickly stuck Starshooter under him and caught him in midair. When he fell on the pile of bombs behind me, I gulped a second, but I didn't blow up and I didn't have time to worry about it anyway. I had to dodge the wreckage of Simone as it fell all around me, and for a moment I caught the eye of Jim's navigator, Peter Fraser, as he in the rear seat fell with the tail. Peter was trying to stand up out of his seat like he planned to jump over to my plane, and I wanted to catch him, but I had to move away from him to avoid the remains of the wings, and we both knew I wouldn't make it back in time, even if I tried to come back for him. "George! He's coming back!" Jim roared behind me, so I made a sharp turn, found the albatross coming at us, and yanked my stick to avoid the gunfire. The albatross turned and followed close to my tail, so I rocked the plane left and right, making it hard to get a bead on us as a feint. But the moment the albatross started getting comfortable with our speed, I suddenly shot upwards. I kept that nose up as the sky flipped upside down, and we were flying upside down too. "Ah! Ah!" Jim yelled behind me. The bombs in the back seat went flying out, bouncing off Jim as he tried desperately not to fall out. I'd never even tried to fly upside down, and even though I pulled it off, the albatross calmly made a sharp turn and parked itself on our tail as I righted us, so I told Jim to throw a bomb at it. "I'll never hit it!" Jim shouted. "Just throw them! They don't have to hit!" I yelled back, and brandished my pistol. "Ah!" Jim yelled, not following my drift at all. He threw a bomb, and I shot at it. Bang, bang, bang! The bomb exploded in the air with a tremendous boom, right next to the albatross, and the blast and fire knocked it sideways, and must have burned the pilot badly, since the plane dropped away without correcting course. "Jesus! Can you do that again?" Jim asked, because there were 2 more planes coming towards us. "Nope, let's run for it." We had to get this information to our forces. But these albatross fighter planes not only had the machine guns timed to the propellers so they could fire through them without hitting, they were also much faster than the old models, and they caught us in no time. I couldn't dodge the volleys fast enough, and they blew off my tail ring. "Fuckers!" Jim yelled, and this time threw a bomb and tried to shoot it with his own pistols, but before he could pull the trigger, the enemy's bullets hit it, and boom! The 2 albatross planes shot straight into the blast radius, came out on fire, and in the ensuing panic tapped wings, lost their balance, crashed into each other again, got stuck together, and fell away, still entangled. We watched this in silence, then both broke up laughing. That was lucky. I turned around and shook hands with Jim, then stared at the tail of Star Shooter, with its missing rings. Jim followed my gaze. "Well," I said, "emergency landing it is." Jim shrugged. "In the middle of the North Sea? Guess it's better than what Peter got." "Sorry about Peter. Nobody could have saved him. I should be thanking you. Seriously, man, I owe you one. If your plane hadn't split apart so perfectly, I could never have done it, and even then I just happened to be in exactly the right place." "Yeah." Jim was starting to shake. I turned back round, facing forward. So, I thought, how close to our forces would I be able to get? Not at all close, I decided instantly. That first shot from the side had scratched the fuel tank, and the fuel gauge showed we were out of petrol. And no sooner did I notice than we ran out completely, and the engine sputtered and the propellers stopped. We were still 800 metres up. We were in for a long fall. "It'll be fine. I'll land this thing on the water, no problem," I shouted. "I'm getting rid of these bombs," Jim yelled and started throwing them overboard. One after another they vanished into the low-lying clouds around us. Everything around us was white. Except between the silhouettes of the unmoving propeller blades was a tiny face. A face with no eyes. It was grinning at me, its mouth filled with fangs. There was petrol running down its chin like drool. We hadn't run out of fuel. He'd sucked it all out. The little monster gargled the petrol, cackling. "Hey, Jorge Joestar! I'm afraid you're gonna die here. And after you're dead, I'm gonna kill your family too. Their deaths will be even worse than yours." The laugh was so shrill it made Jim squeal behind me. He could see it too. See the monster that knew my name. It had brown skin, unruly brown hair, and the way it was grinning at me. I knew him, I thought. Who was he? I grabbed the camera I kept in my seat and pressed the shutter. Snap! A moment later, we were out of the clouds, could see around us, and the face between the propellers was gone. Neither of us said a word at first. Jim, you saw that, right? I asked, still peering through the viewfinder at the propellers. He didn't answer. Hey, did you see it? I asked, turning around. Jim Graham's mouth was wide open, his eyes rolled back, and he was clawing at his throat with both hands. He was forcing fragments of sound out, but there was something stuffed inside his throat, preventing him from talking. What? Was he having a seizure? Jim, what's going on? I shouted. Jim's eyes locked onto mine, and for a second I had hope, and then he shoved his own hand all the way into his mouth, shoved it even farther back, grabbed something and yanked it out. His own tongue. Jim seemed too far gone to know that, and kept pulling with all his strength, stretching his tongue until he'd pulled it a good 30 centimetres out of his mouth. It was no longer just his tongue. He was now pulling out flesh that belonged inside his throat. But Jim wouldn't stop pulling. Hey! Jim, stop! What are you doing? What the fuck? What was he doing? I was starting to panic, but Jim didn't give a shit. He just grabbed the mess of flesh with both hands and pulled even harder, and everything inside came out like potatoes from the ground. One hand kept pulling while the other was squeezing everything that came out, and then I noticed that he'd even managed to pull out part of his own ribs, and I nearly threw up. Jim's eyes had rolled back in his head again, but there was blood coming out his eyelids and his ears and his nose, and looked totally dead except his hands wouldn't stop moving. When his stomach and small intestines tried to follow his esophagus out, they caught in his jaw, but he tried to force them out anyway, and he pulled so hard his stomach ripped in half and his hand snapped forward, flinging blood and bits of organs in my direction. I turned quickly away, but they spattered across the back of my head and dripped down my neck, and this was so unbelievably gross I couldn't stand it anymore and puked all over my cockpit. Tears running down my face, I threw up every last thing in my stomach. Behind me, Jim's hands were still moving. He was now alternating hands, ripping out pieces of the organs jammed in his mouth, tossing them out into the air. My plane was about to crash, and what was happening behind me was so horrific I could barely think straight. For a moment I wondered if Jim and I should just plunge straight down into the ocean to our deaths. But I thought better of it. Fuck dying here. My mind cleared. Ever since the war started, there'd been a part of me that was okay dying in combat, that accepted the notion that there was honour in a death like that. But that was bullshit. Maybe there were places where it was worth dying, but this wasn't fucking one of them. I stopped watching Jim throw his insides out into the ocean. There was no time to let my mind be clouded by that madness. I faced forward, fixed my eyes on the rapidly approaching ocean surface and kept them there. Mixed into the constant sound of flesh being dragged out of him, I could hear a voice whispering, George, help me. Wait for now. The Starshooter's about to hit the ocean. At the last second I lifted the nose of the Starshooter, touching the wingless tail to the water's surface. Gently, softly, quietly, the Starshooter ran across the water's surface, water spraying behind it, and I gradually let the weight of the plane settle on the water until the floats on either side had touched down. If the sea had been flat like a mirror, it would have been an absolutely beautiful landing, but the waves rocked me, ram, thunk, and each blow forced me to yank my stick up and down, trying to soften the blows. In time we slowed down, and finally came to a stop. I touched down successfully. I took a deep breath, let it out, and then turned to see why Jim had gone silent. He was curled up in the round seat, not moving at all. There was blood all over the floor and seat and the plane around it. Bits of flesh were stuck here and there, clinging to the walls and sliding down the instrument panel. I stood up, reached over, and put my fingers to Jim's throat, checking for a pulse. There was none. He wasn't breathing either. He was dead. Staring at the body of my friend, I sat down on the armoured plate in front of the cockpit, wondering just what in the hell I could do next. I should have been celebrating the landing with Jim, but now I was all alone. The surface of the North Sea was dark. The sky was blue, the clouds high above, the breeze crisp but gentle. My second time adrift, I thought, but no, that wasn't quite right. The first time I hadn't even been born yet. Perhaps I'd listened to Mother's story a little too intently. It must have been very hard for her to deal with Vampire Dio while holding baby Lisa and hiding my father's head. But here I was, bobbing all alone. Which of us had it worse? There was no comparing our experiences and no point in comparing them. Mother survived her experience. Then I started wondering why it had even occurred to me to try comparing the experiences, and I realised it was because I was confident I'd survived mine too. Why did I think that? There could only be one answer. Lisa. I had her. I waited confidently for Lisa to get here, soaking in the sun. That made me sleepy, so I went to sleep. The sound of an airplane engine woke me. Vroom! The propellers woke me, but I didn't open my eyes. She'd come, I knew, and the satisfaction of finding out that I'd been right about came as a mild surprise, but got ignored because I'd been listening to engine sounds a while now and knew what they all sounded like. But this engine wasn't one I'd ever heard before. If it wasn't English or French, did that mean it was German? An enemy? I opened my eyes and looked up to see a hydroplane coming towards me of a unique shape I knew at once. I'd seen the designs for it pinned to the wall in his workshed. This was the Multirising, the plane Stephen Multirise designed. As Multirising got low enough, Lisa clearly couldn't wait anymore and leaned out of her seat. No, wait. She straight up climbed out of it, holding onto the side of the plane with only one hand and foot, the end of her dress flapping in the wind for a second, before she jumped off about 5 metres over the water. Oh! My heart leaped to my throat, but she splashed down calmly, without much splash at all. She just slid along the surface of the water, kicking up spray as she killed her momentum, then stood up and came running across the water directly towards me. "George, are you all right?" As I gaped at her, vroom, the Multirising turned over my head, as if hesitant about landing. I looked up. The man in the cockpit lifted his goggles and met my gaze. I couldn't read his expression, but it was Stephen. 10 years older. He'd lost a little weight, and there was a harshness around his eyes, but he was the same dude I'd been into so many planes with. Stephen and I just looked at each other, making no attempt at greeting. We just made sure the other was alive, that we could each see the other, and that we'd be able to speak to each other again. Stephen lowered his goggles, and the Multirise began slowly descending and touched down. How I felt as I watched this, I still don't really know. Was I mad at him for framing me for Kenton's murder, sad because he'd betrayed me, or honestly glad to see him again? And when I looked at Stephen and instantly thought that he was innocent after all, was that just because I wanted him to be? Since meeting John Moore Brabazon and getting into cars and airplanes, I'd had fun with a lot of different people, but even now I still tended to latch on to friends, which meant I might still be fixated on Stephen. "George, you aren't hurt, are you? Thank God," Lisa said, throwing her arms around me, tears in her eyes. He'd brought her to me. He'd brought Lisa to me, so did that mean I could trust him? Lisa, I said. "How do you know where I was?" There's a Hamon master named Tom Petty. He can use Hamon to predict what will happen in the future." "He can see the future? He's always right?" "As far as I know." "So why did you do that for me?" "It wasn't free, you know. There's something we'll need you to do. But first you want to talk to Stephen, right?" Did I? I was a little scared. It felt more like I sort of had to talk to him now that he was here. "I'm sorry I just brought him like this," Lisa said, as if reading my mind. "But this morning, Tom Petty suddenly told me he'd predicted you'd crash, and the only pilot I could get to fly me to a battlefield right away was Stephen." That meant Stephen and Lisa had been close by this morning. You seem close. What are you and Stephen up to?" "I'm sure Stephen will tell you. George, I know it's been a while, but you're still the only man for me." And with that, Lisa kissed me on the cheek. A gentle kiss, without any Hamon, and it occurred to me we hadn't kissed on the lips since that temple underground in Rome, and maybe it was time we started being more grown up. And then I got really carried away, but part of me was also going, with Lisa? Really? But this was no time to get lost in that mess again. The sound of those propellers was slowing down as Stephen taxied the Multirising over to us. What should I say? Was it even my job to speak first here? Stephen was the one who'd killed Kenton and framed me for it and gone into hiding. In the end, he spoke first. "Been a while, George. Sorry I couldn't get in touch with you. After you got arrested, I started chasing the real killer, trying to prove you were innocent. Then 3 years later, I was a suspect, and the police were looking for me, so I couldn't go back to England. My father also suggested that if I were arrested, they'd force a guilty verdict, so they could hand me over to the military and do experiments on me. But let me make one thing absolutely clear here, George. I did not kill Kenton. She was killed by a Spanish-speaking midget with no eyes." I had no idea what to say. He kept talking. "Kenton had been telling me about him for months before he killed her. She said when she flew while the clouds were dark, it was raining, a monster would show up. She said it would laugh at her, say things that she thought might be in Spanish and do things to her or the plane. But I never caught a glimpse of it, no matter how closely I watched.
She swore it had shown up right in front of me. The cloth on the glider tore, screws or nuts or the wings came loose. Sometimes there were scratches on her body, and it was obvious something was going on while she was flying. But neither of us took it all that seriously. I think these wings of mine made us used to weird shit like that.
Weird shit? Jesus, what this thing had done went way beyond weird shit. I remember trying to repair Multirising 5 after pulling that out of the water at the bottom of those cliffs. I found 2 sets of 4 claw marks, the day before Kenton died. I'd totally forgotten about that. Stephen went on.
But one day, Kenton picked the words Jorge Joestar out of the monster's Spanish muttering. She thought that must mean you, George. She didn't know much Spanish, but she could tell what the monster was saying was insulting, maybe even a curse of some kind. And as your friend, she wouldn't stand for that. She got mad and yelled at it, and it turned its empty eyes on her and said, "You're going to die," in English, and then it vanished. That didn't scare Kenton at all. She just got mad and worried about you. She insisted we had to tell you about this the next time we saw you, warn you a monster was taking your name in vain and up to something evil. It was raining the next day, and she was called to the cliffs by someone using your name. But you weren't there and she was murdered, and you were framed for it. George, when I got to the cliffs, it was standing over Kenton with a knife in its hands. I saw it vanish over the edge of the cliff.
A child with no eyes that spoke Spanish. The thing Faraday had seen that day in the Multirise manor was what had killed Kenton. It had cursed my name. It had framed me for the murder. So I wasn't imagining it. So, what's this about you trying to bring Kenton back to life? Stephen nodded as if expecting the question.
I told you. Truth is, we were looking into the possibility. But then Lisa came along, and I saw a real zombie. And I knew it would be an unforgivable sin to make Kenton into one of those horrible things.
So we all climbed into Stephen's Multirising and headed for France. We had to leave Star Shooter behind and look for a chance to file a report about it and Jim's body. Stephen flew the plane and I sat behind him with Lisa on my lap, my arms around her. Her face was bright red and mine felt like it was on fire. Lisa and I kept talking, only partly to distract ourselves. I told her all about the rumours of the midget that had been running around the English air service. Lisa and Stephen both thought long and hard about this. At length, Stephen asked,
"Did it say anything about you?"
Nobody ever said anything like that. Very few people even mention it speaking Spanish. It always just shows up out of nowhere while they're flying, breaks something and then vanishes. Sometimes it speaks Spanish, sometimes it doesn't. The height varies from gnome-like 50 centimetres to the normal child-sized one I saw. And lately the descriptions vary as well. Some say it looks like a lizard with giant ears. Others say it has horns growing out of its head. The only common ground is that it always has dark pits where the eyes should be.
The descriptions vary lately. How many stories in all?
Lisa asked. I couldn't even begin to count. Some days it appears in multiple places. Some people have started calling them gremlins. No idea where that name came from.
In that case, there has to be more than one gremlin.
Undoubtedly. I don't know what's going on with the French pilots or other countries, but the English are flying planes over the Channel and over the North Sea, and there are witnesses from all sectors.
And these reports started happening all at once, all over the place? Or did it seem like they started in one place and spread out?
Now that you mention it, I'm not sure. I first heard about it from someone who'd been sent from the Royal Aero Club to train with the Navy.
Well, that was after 1910, right? Stephen asked. Kenton saw it back in 1905. These things have been in the skies over Westwood for years.
When did you start flying? Lisa asked. 1903.
Did you see it then?
No, I think it was around March in 1905. That's the first time Kenton started talking about them anyway. March, yeah.
George, you moved to England from the Canary Islands in February 1905.
Lisa said pointedly. The implication there left Stephen speechless, so I said, and in October of that year, the evening Kenton was killed, he was in the Multirise manor. Stephen nearly lost it when I told him Faraday's story.
What the... Why the hell didn't he ever tell us?
Almost certainly because he couldn't believe what he'd seen. It was a child with no eyes after all. And since I vanished immediately afterwards, Faraday dared not speak of it. That settles it. This thing's definitely after you, George, Lisa said. If it speaks Spanish, it must have followed you from the Canary Islands. A monster child with no eyes? When we finally reached France, the Hamon masters were waiting for Lisa, and they led us to their secret underground lair. It was close to the German border, right in the heart of the fighting, but the Hamon masters were all totally calm about it, as if it didn't concern them, which really drove home that they were fighting something else entirely. I handed over my camera, asked them to get the contents developed, and while we were waiting for that, I was introduced to a bald Nepetan man named Nyarang Tompati. The moment he laid eyes on me, he called me by name. Jorge Joestar! Nice to meet you, Master Tompati. You have entered my dreams many times now. To me it feels as if we've met many times before. It is an honour to meet you in person. An honour? I'm just a soldier. You are Jonathan Joestar's son? Oh, he met my dad? Instantly I became obnoxiously proud. I hear he was quite a man. Even as a severed head he was oddly impressive. But Tompati just laughed. A man? He was barely a man at all. He was a spoiled boy, weak-willed, not very smart, and prone to taking the easy way out. But he had a glimmer of courage. Jorge Joestar, it can be very difficult to summon even a modest amount of courage in the face of overwhelming fear. When fear left the rest of us frozen to the spot, trying not to piss ourselves, he had the wild courage to take one step forward and say something rude. And you seem to have inherited that courage. Eh? I was genuinely surprised. I could have begun to do what my dad did. Fighting one-on-one with a vampire that had just slaughtered a bunch of cops, throwing himself into a village where nearly the entire population had just been turned into zombies? No fucking way. Courage is not a thing that shows up in your imagination, Tompati said. It's something you squeeze out of yourself when face to face with genuine fear. Terror that leaves every part of you shaking like a leaf. I still was absolutely sure I had no courage. Since he was clearly offering encouragement, there was little point in continuing to deny it. Then I'll do my best, I said, and attempted a Tibetan-style bow, putting my hands together and lowering my head. Then I went to borrow a phone. I got in touch with the English Naval Air Service, gave my name, and was forwarded on. Jorge Joestar, where the hell are you? The man on the other end roared, to my surprise. I'd heard this voice before, but it wasn't the officer I usually reported to. I ignored his question and asked, Sorry, but who is this? You know who it is. I didn't. How out of it can the Joestar's only son be? He roared, and at last I placed the loudmouth. I guess I did know. Mr. William Cardinal. Sir William Cardinal, Mr. Joestar? Fuck. Oh, what was this prick doing here? Sir continued, As of today, I'm now the officer in charge of your unit. Answer my question. Where are you and what are you doing? Why did you abandon an injured companion and run off on your own? An injured companion? Who? Master Jim Graham. Don't you try and play dumb. Injured? You mean Jim's alive? Even though he'd pulled his tongue and stomach and intestines out and thrown them into the ocean? I told you not to play dumb, you coward. Jim Graham told us everything. You encountered 3 German fighters, surrendered immediately, abandoned Jim when he fell into the sea after shooting down 2 enemy planes, and left on an enemy ship. You thought Jim was dead, so you moved directly to spying for the enemy. Ha! You got a lot of nerve. What the fuck was he on about? We took out all 3 Albatross fighters, and Jim himself took 2 of them out. Either his memories are confused or he's deliberately lying, I said. Why would Jim lie? Why would he lie in a way that put me in a tight spot? It made no sense. No, I doubt he'd be lying. He'd lost his mind a bit, attempted suicide, and was quite badly injured. I can totally see the shock scrambling his memories a bit. Suicide? He got scraped up a bit when he crashed into the ocean, but otherwise he's in great shape. I didn't know what he meant. Pardon me for suggesting this, but it is your first day on the job. Is it possible you have Jim Graham confused with someone else? What? Are you mocking me? No, I'll have to talk to Jim when he gets back to the ship. No need! Graham's already here. Our planes found him floating in the wreckage of the plane you abandoned. I'll put him on. Figuring this was better than having Cardinal shout in my ear any longer, I waited for Graham to come on the line.
Jorge Joestar.
It was definitely Graham's voice. Jim, you alive?
No thanks to you. How could you leave me for dead?
What? Jim, what's going on? Shut up! You're a disgrace to the Royal Flying Corps. I'll happily testify to you being a filthy spy.
What? Hey, I'd never abandon you if you were alive. I genuinely thought you were dead.
You thought I was dead, so you felt free to betray us, your friends and your country. What the fuck? Was this not Graham at all? Who are you?
The friends you betrayed and left for dead, Jorge Joestar. The next time I see you, I'll kill you like I would any other goddamn kraut.
Wait! He hung up on me. What was going on? I was still reeling when Lisa came over and showed me a photograph. It showed a child with no eyes, and just as I was starting to pat myself on the back for taking such a clear picture, Lisa said,
You know this boy.
Huh? I froze. Who?
I didn't know any eyeless children,
but that face did look familiar.
Did you forget? There's only one Spanish child who really had it in for you.
I was speechless.
Your old bully, Antonio Torres, Lisa said. Real name Antonio Hightower. Seriously, I never imagined that discarded skin lived on as a zombie.
Lisa went on.
This explains a lot. How did the planes get damaged? The Gremlins were hiding on the plane when they took off. Or the empty skin caught the wind like a kite or a flying squirrel flying to the planes. Or mostly likely both. It also explains why there were so many reports. Remember George, his mother abused him so badly his metabolism accelerated until she could peel off his entire skin every year, from his head to his toes in one single peel. If he's kept that power as a skin zombie, and is still growing new skin, then every year on June 16th, Antonio Torres is making copies of himself. The Torres case on La Palma happened in 1900. 15 years have passed, 14 skinning days, and the copies have all made copies, doubling each time. We now have 16,384 assholes running around, more than enough to terrorise the 800 pilots the Naval Air Service has spread across the Channel and the North Sea, wouldn't you say?
16,384 of that terrifying shitbag Antonio Torres. I damn near toppled over frothing at the mouth. Lisa thought for a moment, then said,
But from what you said, the stories about these gremlins don't describe them consistently. Some are super short, some had totally different features. Only thing they had in common was the holes where the eyes should be.
Yeah.
That might mean they weren't actually meeting the real Antonio, but were making up stories based on the rumours.
How do you mean?
When people are uneasy, they see things that aren't there, and not just illusions. They make it actually happen. Their fears manifest, and their plane gets damaged just as they were imagined.
That doesn't seem possible.
But it is. I mean, you and I met the same thing.
When? In the underground temple
in Rome. You remember that monster in the dark?
The gorilla spider. I remember.
But do you think that actually existed?
Didn't it?
Yes. But I mean, was it born naturally into this world? How would something like that evolve?
Flustered, I remembered. Even then I'd thought that Lisa's emotions had summoned the monster. But
nothing like that exists on the surface, and it wasn't something that should exist anywhere in the world. Yet it was there with us, underground.
Then you believe our imaginations made that thing?
Not just our imaginations. Like my father said, that thing's been in the temple, protecting the treasure all this time. So people must have gone in there after it any number of times. One after another they added to it, imagining what frightening things might be there in the dark with them, and it matched them, growing into a muscular spider with massive legs.
Just remembering that monster was terrifying. It must have been real after all.
And if human imagination follows similar patterns, that gorilla spider could exist in any dark place.
You're seriously scaring me now. But those words got stuck in my throat, and before I could beg her to stop, Lisa kept thinking out loud.
Human fears mingle with their imaginations, and in time those give birth to actual threats. Which explains one other thing. That church on La Palma in 1905, where all those villagers died together. Why? because villagers who had lived through the Torres case were afraid something like that would happen again. And when they gathered together, their fears fed off each other, leading to them all dying together. When scared people gathered together, their amplified fear created the Mothman. But he didn't actually manifest. He was simply drawn on the walls of that locked room, as the last job of those who were dying. My consciousness blurred as I remembered those horrifying drawings, scribbled with the ash and blood of bodies as they burned. Lisa's voice grew faint, sounding far away. Humans have only just learned to fly, but now that they've created gremlins, I suppose from now on, any time scared people are flying, they'll be attacked by an eyeless Antonio. Amazing.
I fainted. End of chapter 11. Chapter 12. Rhinoceros Beetle. When I told him Jorge Joestar had died of cancer 2 years ago, Kars said,
"Oh, luck was always on his side."
"If he was still alive, would you have sought revenge?" I asked. "He'd be an old man, nearly 100 years old."
"I would indeed. After all, the man sent me into space 37 times. I won't feel free from that fate until things are settled between us. I've spent nigh eternity dreaming of placing a stone mask on that man, turning him into a vampire, having him devour others, and finally eating him myself."
Stone mask?
A tool that turns humans into a good source of energy and nutrition. Mere humans are hardly enough to satisfy our appetites. Turning them into vampires makes them far more appetizing, and drinking blood makes them young again, and much stronger. I'm sure Jorge Joestar would make a pleasingly delicious vampire.
Desperately trying to look calm, I listened to Kars' terrifying story, my mind reeling. A stone mask that turned humans into vampires? Was that even possible?
"Humans are a life form with possibilities,"
Kars said.
"You could do almost anything if you simply tweak their brains a little. Changes to the brain change the electric currents. If the electric signals change, the blood changes. If the blood changes, the bones and the organs and skin, and all the rest changes. Jorge Joestar, you are quite lacking in height compared to Joseph."
Lacking? I wasn't lacking. Certainly I was shorter than my grandfather, who was over 190 centimetres, but I was taller than the average Japanese man. As I thought this, Kars reached his hand out to my head. I froze, and his fingers slipped into my head as easily as an airplane slips into a cloud. "Ah!" I squealed, but I was afraid I'd die if I moved, so I had to stay perfectly still.
"Don't worry. The brain has no capacity for pain,"
Kars said, and pulled his fingers out of my head, leaving no holes or any sign he'd reached inside me. Just as I was starting to feel relieved, a weird sound came from my throat, and my head snapped sideways of its own accord, and I thought maybe that sound wasn't me swallowing, but my neck breaking, and then snap, crunch, crack, all the bones in my body started twisting in all sorts of crazy directions, one after the other. But it only looked horrible. I could feel the vibrations running through me, but no pain. My knees and elbows bent backwards, and my wrists spun the wrong way, and it seemed obvious all my bones were breaking, but apparently they weren't, and I was fine. And I was about 20 centimetres taller. Huh?
"See? I know the human brain,"
Kars said.
"I could also make wings grow from your back."
He started to reach his hand out again, but I ducked under it. "I'm fine."
Humans are a fascinating species. They seem like they're constantly striving to become something else, but they resist actual change. Most likely they simply enjoy imagining things. That's what I like most about the human race. They are the only ones who imagine, who create, who make stories. When I was living underground, I gathered the stories humans had written and read them. Humans are the only species that enjoy things that happen to others of their kind. At first, I had no idea how they were enjoying it. Our brains had no concept of emotional investment, of putting ourselves in others' shoes. It wasn't easy to do. My race was complete as it was and satisfied with that. And as a result they lacked ambition, made no progress of any kind, and lived a life of stagnation. But there's a difference between being actually sufficient and simply not knowing that something is insufficient. I came to understand that we weren't perfect. We just hadn't noticed that we weren't. We lacked even the ability to realize this fact because we had never compared ourselves to anyone else. Because we expected nothing from anyone else and made do entirely with what we already had. But I noticed, reading human writings and learning to enjoy them sent new electric impulses through my mind. I knew then we never stopped to think about our own potential. We were certain our species was the pinnacle of all things, and thus we'd stopped progressing. This was the first time I ever felt dissatisfied, the first time I'd ever questioned myself. That quickly led to frustration, to anger, and that frustration and anger pleased me. It was what you'd call a eureka moment. I was furious with myself, and that was cause for celebration. It was proof that I, too, had potential. And looking back, I was baffled by how I'd ever lived without doubt, without dissatisfaction. We could never set foot in the light of the sun, could never know the world above during the day. We were trapped in the world underground. I couldn't bear it any longer, so I quickly began exploring my own potential, my own brain. Everything begins with the brain. To study our brains, I began killing my own kind like we killed humans. I killed them, split open their heads and examined their brains, as I suspected we had potential. In order to investigate closer, further, and with more certainty, I killed a great many more. But murder itself didn't really pose a problem among my kind. After all, none of them cared for anyone but themselves. Sometimes I even killed in front of others of my kind, but nobody said anything. They had no emotional investment, no imagination, and I slowly realized just how appalling that was. If someone attempted to attack us, to conquer us, and we attacked it with such disinterest, that could be the end of us. We would be annihilated by our own self-satisfaction and arrogance. Fearing for my own safety, I continued my studies, created the stone mask, stretched my brain, and conquered the sun. And not only that, I created a perfect body for myself, one superior to all other living things.
Huh? So, how's not dying?
There's a lot of time.
The question I'd asked absently hit directly to the heart of things, and Kars' whispered response had an air of such grim realism I almost started laughing, but he was watching me suspiciously. Whoops. If he thought I was mocking him, he might get angry, and in such close quarters, well, it was about 3 times the size of the H.G. Wells, but there was still nowhere to run, and I'd no hope of standing against him. Okay, I thought. Was it acceptable to allow this ultimate Kars to reach Earth 6 months from now? Of course not. After all, he ate humans. He also turned them into vampires, but either way, he was clearly the enemy of mankind. Sure, there wasn't a rule that humans shouldn't have any predators. Yet as a human faced with such a threat, I felt obligated to do what I could. But this predator was immortal, so I couldn't just kill him. Could I somehow blow up the ship? No. He was smart enough to take the Jotos apart and build them into this ship in the blink of an eye. We didn't have any powerful explosives at hand, and even if we blew it up with Das Boot, Kars would just kill Narancha the moment he realised what we were doing and the stand would vanish. As the thought crossed my mind, there was a sonar ping from inside me. Das Boot had snuck inside my body again, without Kars noticing. I glanced at Narancha. The boy's eyes were totally those of a Mafia veteran. He was going to try something before he got eaten. With Das Boot? It could only move inside living tissue and stands. Wait, part of the ship was made from the extra cars. He could move through that. That must be how he got the submarine inside me without touching me. What else could he do? But before I could think of anything else, Kars said,
"What's this?"
I looked over, and Kars had his hand inserted into his own chest. He felt around inside himself, then pulled his hand out with one of Narancha's submarines held in it.
"Is this a machine? Has human technology created bolts that can go inside the body?
Oh shit, I thought. Neither Naranchi or I had even begun to understand how ultimate the ultimate thing really was. As if proving that, Kars sat down on the floor and took Dust Boot apart as we watched. His fingers moved with such unhesitating precision it was as if he'd built it himself. First he heated the tips of his fingers like a blowtorch, making a line across the outer walls, and after peeling them off he divided it into engineering sections, living quarters, control rooms and missile storage. Tiny hands had come out of the tips of his fingers, and were turning and operating every nut and screw, leaving the entire plumbing system intact. It was like he stroked it and everything divided itself into pieces, lined up in neat rows on the floor, down to the individual spoons in the kitchen or the springs in the beds. When it came to the monitors in the control room, or the computers in engineering, he not only took them apart, he also analysed the structure.
Some sort of visual data,
he muttered, putting the computer back together. He plugged the cord into the palm of his hand and opened his mouth. A beam of light emerged from the back of his throat, and a thin membrane appeared between his jaws, turning his mouth into a projector. The information flowing from his palm was transferred into a thin cellophane-like paper, and projected onto the wall across from him. It was a sexy photo of a naked woman. Narancia shrieked, turning bright red. Stop! Stop it! What the fuck? God damn it! He was in such a tizzy he forgot all about shame and fear and threw himself at Kars, trying to cover up the lens. But Kars easily lifted him, spun him round in the air, placed him flat on his back on the ceiling, and tied him there with cords and pipes. Below him, Kars kept on projecting. Ka-chunk, ka-chunk. With an analogue sound, like an old slide projector, image after image displayed, every single one of the same naked girl. I said stop! Yo, this is morally wrong, damn it! Please, Mr. Kars, I really fucking need it! Narancia was so worked up now, his nose had started bleeding, dripping down from the ceiling. I was definitely starting to feel sorry for him. Kars, these might be personal memories. It's not the best manners to display someone's precious, and no sooner had the words left my mouth than the next picture showed that girl on the cover of a magazine. Huh? Wait, are these all pin-ups? Ah! How dare you! My Trish Chickalata! Narancia screamed. Now I placed her. Trish Chickalata was a famous porn star who'd become a member of the Italian Parliament. She was famous even in Japan. She was middle-aged now, but these were all up from when she was young. I glanced up, accidentally meeting Narancia's eye. What, motherfucker? You better not tell anyone about this or I swear I'll fucking kill you! Let me down, Kars! If I get free of this, I'll kill all of you! He screamed, spraying spit and nose blood. You can like whoever you want, I said weakly. This didn't appear to comfort him at all. Shut up! He roared. Shut the fuck up! Fuck you all! He then began trying to spit at me. I dodged, laughing. What the hell were we even doing? Kars turned his mouth projector back into his normal mouth and said,
So this machine has come from inside your body. Have human bodies become capable of making machines?
Die, Kars! Narancia yelled, now just spitting furiously in all directions. Kars ignored this completely. He stood up and reached his hand towards Narancia's belly. Afraid he'd die if Kars dissected him looking for the factory, I hastily yelled, No, Kars! It exists as a machine, but it's something else entirely. Kars stopped his hand and looked at me.
What do you mean?
It's called a stand. It takes the form of a machine, but isn't one. I only just learned about them today myself, but stands are something ordinary humans don't have. A special power, like telekinesis or telepathy, or psychic powers, but much more varied and complex. They can look like people, animals, plants, or machines. Only people who have stands can see them or touch them. I just happened to have found someone who made it so I could see and touch stands, but I'm not a stand master myself.
Then I can use stands too?
Well, I'm guessing you can see and touch them because you're the ultimate life form. I trailed off as Kars held his palm up in front of his chest, and a submarine surfaced from inside him. It was a different design from Narancia's dust boot. I looked up at the ceiling, and Narancia appeared to be shocked, speechless. Kars had just spontaneously developed a stand. Kars said, staring at his stand.
I understand now.
Whoops. We were fucked now, I thought. Everything was possible for the ultimate being. He could absorb anything without limits.
Since it's my own power, I can easily grasp what it can do.
Kars said, and an explosive sound echoed through every inch of my body. It was so loud I covered my ears, but since the noise was inside me, I couldn't block it.
It seems you really don't have a stand,
Kars said, and I was relieved my eardrums had survived what I suddenly realised was an extremely loud sonar. My ears were still ringing. This was nuts. I turned towards the groan and saw Enrico Pucci writhing on the floor, clutching his hands to his ears, his face screwed up in pain. He must be getting the deafening solar treatment too.
There's something in you,
Kars said, striding over to him. Despite his injuries, Pucci tried to scramble away, but was moving too slowly, and there was nowhere to go. No. Kars ignored his hoarse pleas, bent over and stuck his arm in Pucci's back. Pucci screamed, and Kars began dragging a humanoid stand about the same size as Pucci out of his back by the neck.
Kars said, examining it. This looks like a man, but he's no man, nor any animal. What is it? Why are there letters written all over its skin?
Shit. Shut up! Do it right, Snake! Pucci yelled. His stand turned and punched Kars in the cheek. Kars' head rolled sideways with the blow, and a disc popped out of his head. But not one or two, but a flood of them, bubbling out of his head, spilling ceaselessly onto the floor. Pucci froze to the spot, horrified. Even as more discs poured out of him, Kars turned back to Pucci and said,
So this is your stand's power. Fascinating. I understand it.
Huh? Before I even had time to be surprised, a humanoid stand emerged from Kars' back. It looked like Pucci's Whitesnake, but it was bigger, and had 3 heads and 6 arms like a statue of Ashura. The middle arm on the right punched Pucci's face, and 2 discs came out. Kars looked mildly surprised.
Only 2?
Discs were still spilling out of his own head with no signs of ever slowing down. They were forming quite a pile.
Let's see.
Kars picked up one of Pucci's discs and placed it inside his own forehead.
I see. White Snake. A stand that can turn memories and stand powers into discs and steal them, and control people by writing to the discs,
he said, once he'd finished reading Pucci's stand disc. Stop. Please, Pucci said.
How did you get this power?
Kars asked.
Were you stabbed by a special arrow? Long ago when I was on Earth, there were occasional people with special powers, and I made a tool that could pull those powers out of humans. A bow and arrow. I barely used it before I began slaughtering my own species. In theory, that bow and arrow can trigger a reaction. To protect their own lives from the fatal wound, their talents would blossom, the energy would heal the wounds, and they would discover special abilities previously hidden within them. Has something like that pulled this stand out of you?
Without waiting for Pucci to answer, Kars pulled the memory disc out of him, knocking him out, and placed it in his own head.
It seems my bow and arrow was not involved, but the theory's not wrong. The devil's palm. While the body hangs between life and death, only those with a stand lurking inside them will be saved.
I'd heard the legends of the devil's palm, a holy spot somewhere in America that moved itself from place to place, and those that wandered into it were either chosen or died. Kars sighed.
But everything else is quite dull. There's nothing to be learned from human memories. They lack attention to detail, their thought patterns are shallow, and their recall is shockingly poor.
He reached up to pull the disc out. He said, pausing.
What?
Then he took the disc out, slammed him back at Pucci's head, glanced at me and laughed.
Thanks to him, 6 months will take 4 hours. Aren't you lucky?
Huh? We both gaped at him, but he turned his attention back to Pucci, who'd woken up again.
You there. I did not write a message on the outside of Giorno. I did not throw it down to Earth. Think on that. Who prepared the metal plate that killed your family?
Huh? What? We'd all assumed the notes about the way to heaven had led us to the back of Mars, where we found the Jojos and Kars, and all of us, myself included, had assumed that was key to finding this heaven, so this revelation threw me for a loop. But who else could have prepared that metal sheet with a message on it? Who had dropped that from the sky onto Poochie's house? And how? They hadn't just dropped it on his house, they'd wiped it from the face of the earth. Who else could do that?
Think about it,
Kars said.
If I could throw a metal plate down to Earth, I'd have flown down myself. This is impossible. Even if the metal's treated to be heat resistant, there's no possible way a single metal plate could survive all the way from space to the surface without burning up. I know everything about the Jojo's heat shields. No matter what angle it entered the atmosphere, it would melt in the stratosphere. To begin with, they've obviously only applied the heat-resistant treatment to the outside. The back of the plate is ordinary metal and would melt away first, and they've even carved letters into the front of it. That would ruin whatever effect the treatment had. Why is it humans choose to blind themselves the moment things cease to make sense? Why can't you stop yourselves from being so stupid you ignored the facts that don't fit with your desire to believe this was a message from space?
But the strangest part was, nobody else had noticed the meteor falling. That's what Funny Valentine had said. That should have caught my attention. It was more than just strange. But looking things over again, how could throwing an iron plate leave a 17-metre crater? That seemed unlikely if it hadn't been travelling as fast as it would have if it was coming from outer space. But that's only if it was thrown normally. What if it wasn't thrown normally? Thrown by someone not normal, using a not normal throwing technique?
Come now, remember the sky,
Kars said, annoyed by Poochie's silence.
Even with your pathetically low recall, you should be able to manage that much. Remember him.
Huh? When Poochie just gaped at him, Kars spat.
Look!
And turned his mouth into a projector again, beaming an image onto the wall. Ka-chunk! The evening sky, orange and purple mingled. A single dot against it. Ka-chunk! That dot enlarged, clearly human-shaped. Ka-chunk! The humanoid form enlarged, but with the sun at his back, his face and figure were in shadow, impossible to make out. Ka-chunk! The contrast adjusted, illuminating everything. The man floating in the air was muscular, with long limbs and a barrel chest, even features twisted in a wicked grin. I knew that man. No, I didn't. I don't know why I thought I did. He was white, and looked like no one I'd ever seen. Long narrow eyes, a strong jaw, full lips, and 3 moles on his left ear. He was handsome, but there was something inherently evil about his face. His smile let us catch a glimpse of 2 long, sharp fangs. He didn't seem like a stand master. He didn't even seem like a human. The image on the wall vanished, and Kars laughed.
He's a vampire. What could my food source be plotting? Sending me a spaceship and Jorge Joestar's grandson.
Eh? I'm adopted. Not actually related to Joseph at all. And it wasn't this mysterious vampire who put me on the H.G. Wells, but Tsukumajuku. When I said so, Kars' white snake appeared in front of me, fists clenched. Oh, he's going to hit me, I thought. But I didn't even have time to brace myself. Wham! Not only did my face turn, but my whole body followed it, and I went spinning through the air. He hit me so hard it's a wonder my neck didn't break. It was probably a good thing I didn't brace myself. Going limp probably saved me.
I'd better check your memories too,
Kars said. Whitesnake pulled the disc out of my head and slotted it into Kars. His relaxed tone belied the sheer force he'd used, but I lacked the energy to argue that point. My cheekbone appeared to be broken, and I couldn't touch it, and it was already super swollen. Both my shoulders were still injured, so I was pretty much hurting all over. I tried to squeeze the throbbing pain out of my mind and wonder why Tsukumajuku had brought me to Mars in the first place. I am your instrument. A person needs your help. I'll take you to them. That's all he'd said, but I still hadn't done anything here. All I'd done was meet Kars, and it sounded like he and Jorge Joestar had a history, but Kars couldn't be the person who needed my help. He wasn't a person. I thought that far, then I shook my head. Actually, my cheek hurt too much to shake, so I just did it in my mind. The reason I'd done nothing wasn't because the person who needed me wasn't here. I hadn't done anything because they hadn't tried to do anything. If I actually accomplished something, then that would be useful to whoever it was who needed me. The journey Tsukumajuku had given wasn't over yet, and it seemed like this space trip might actually finish within the 4 hours we'd been given. I had no idea why. Kars-senpai, I said. The blood in my mouth made a gross sound and I nearly started coughing on it, but managed to stop myself and say again, Kars-senpai, sorry, can you heal me up? My body and head hurt so much I can't think straight. Kars didn't respond at all, so for a moment, just a moment, I managed to trick myself into turning to look at him. Even that slight movement felt like someone took a long harpoon and jammed it into my cheek and through my brain, with such force it wound up sticking 2 meters out the other side, and the pain of it left my vision blurry. But I managed to recover and see Kars enjoying my memories. He was just staring at empty space, but I think he was enjoying my colourful life. Yo! Karsi! Don't ignore me! Kars's eyes suddenly focused on me, and he grinned.
You sure waste a lot of time on stupid puzzles.
Nah, they might look simple from the results and solutions, but that was just the egg of Columbus, and actually getting there was pretty dang hard. I would have argued that point all day, but simply couldn't right now. I'd like to think faster, so if you could just heal me?
In the end, you're just another human,
Kars said, ignoring me again.
You see a mystery and think, how odd, and put it on a shelf somewhere.
Shut up. Even if I put things together after the fact, as long as I get there in the end, what does it matter? If I stopped to ponder every mystery I saw before collecting all the information I needed, I'd never solve anything, I managed to spit out. But was there any point in arguing advanced detecting with the ultimate thing? But to my surprise, Kars just said,
Makes sense.
And then noticed my condition.
You could still think like that even without your memory disk. This isn't something learned through experience, but a creation of your innate intelligence. I see why they call you the deduction machine.
I had a lot of ideas about where he'd pulled that from my memories, but that was an insult critics of the detective novel genre used to dismiss the presence of the detective character. But that didn't goddamn matter, so I summoned the last bit of energy I had and spit out, Heal me? And at last Kars heard me.
Heal you? Human healing is far too weak. It takes far too much time,
he said, coming over and crouching down next to me, leaving my disc stuck in his head.
Remember this. The heal button is right here,
he said, and stuck his fingers just to the left of the crown of my head. But I couldn't actually see him doing this, and I couldn't stick my fingers in my own brain anyway. Then my brain went BAM! And suddenly inflated, then squeezed itself tight like it was pumping something downwards. And first the swelling on my cheek got way larger, and the bones started making scraping sounds like they were rubbing against each other. And the skin on my cheek came back, and the swelling was gone, and my bones moved back to normal, and everything was slim again. My cheek was healed in an instant, and then the swelling went down to my shoulders. BAM! Both shoulders went giant and round, and the wounds yawned open but didn't hurt and didn't bleed. A sort of wind came from my body, and when that stopped, the wounds were closed and the swelling went down, and my flesh and muscles and bones were all connected right like they'd always been. After healing my shoulders, the swelling went all the way down the rest of my body like it was looking for other wounds and injuries to heal, and finally ended up at my ass where it came out like a fart. I yelped, embarrassed, and jumped to my feet, but my body was entirely back to normal, and I felt better than I had in years, except that I was still too tall. Kars, sorry, can you put me back at my old height?
Isn't the view better?
It wasn't bad to begin with, and my clothes don't fit anymore, so I look like shit.
You can always change your clothes,
says the half-naked man. But I didn't say that, and Kars reached out and stuck his hand in my brain again, and a moment later, my bones all broke the opposite direction from before, and then I was my old height again. Good. I felt like my head was a little larger than normal, but it had always been on the big side. Okay, I said. Time to think. Kars, can I have the disc back?
It's more effective if I look at it.
But they're my memories, I said, and since a third of the disc was sticking out of Kars' head, I grabbed it and yanked it out. I was getting pretty bold. If it was going to kill me, it'd be over in an instant. That instant was always hovering over me, and I had no way of predicting what would cause that instant to arrive, so I just didn't give a shit anymore. Even after he healed my wounds, I couldn't exactly relax here. But as I was putting the disc back in my head, Kars said,
I already found him.
Who?
That vampire.
Where? In my memories?
Yes.
Really? So I've met that vampire before?
No, you simply saw a photo of him.
Huh?
When you were 7, you were looking at an album of old photographs in the old Joestar home, and it momentarily entered your field of vision.
How the fuck was I supposed to remember that? I didn't even remember the album. Kars laughed at my dumbfounded expression.
Like I said, your memories are more useful when I view them.
Then Kars turned his mouth into a projector again and displayed my memory on the wall. Ka-chunk! A page of an album filled with black and white photographs. Ka-chunk! A close-up of the largest photo on the page. It was apparently a picture from when the Joestars were living in America. It was a big house with what looked like a large farmland outside. 3 well-dressed men were lined up outside the house. The middle-aged man in the centre was sitting in the chair, and 2 boys stood beside him. All 3 were smiling. Ka-chunk! A close-up of the boy on the left. Light-coloured hair that looked soft to the touch. Long, narrow eyes, a sturdy chin, and full lips. Him. He had a pleasant expression, and he was still young, not fully grown, of a much slighter build, but it was clearly the same person who we'd seen floating in the air looking evil as shit. Ka-chunk! The whole photograph displayed again. This time it also showed the note under the photograph. A caption, written in English, that said, 1881, Joestar Estate, and 3 names, arranged in an upside-down triangle to match the positions of the 3 men. The middle-aged man in the chair was Jorge Joestar. The boy standing on his right was Jonathan Joestar, and the boy in question was labelled Dio Brando. Dio Brando. When I saw that name, it felt like a bolt of lightning ran down my back. 1881? That was 131 years ago. Jonathan was my great-great-grandfather, Joseph's grandfather. Joseph had apparently not gone on well with his own father, Jojo Joestar, who was apparently a gloomy man of few words. It was hard to tell what he was thinking, the exact opposite of Joseph, who for better or for worse was always bullshit-free. But he often mentioned his grandfather with something approaching reverence. A gentleman, kind-hearted, handsome, and so athletic he played rugby with the young men until quite late in life. If he was with Jonathan as a boy, this bearded man in the chair, Jorge Joestar, was most likely his father, the Jojo of 6 generations before me, albeit of no blood relation. Another Jorge Joestar, I thought, and remembered what Tsukumajuku had said. In my world, there is another Jorge Joestar. Had Tsukumajuku's friend been this middle-aged George? No, that didn't fit. Tsukumajuku had simply claimed to be from a world where it was July 23rd, 1904, 23 years after this picture was taken, or even more. The world he'd come from had had a completely different map. 100 years wasn't enough time for all the continents to fuse together. Or was it? Look at what was happening to Morio and Nero Island. Sprouting 6 legs like that would hardly be enough, I guess. But was it really out of the question that all the continents had moved that quickly and made the world we lived in? And that world history had chosen to keep that fact a secret? Wait, I thought. I already knew that I didn't need to think in terms of the history I was living in. I looked at Kars. This Kars was the original Kars. Because he was the ultimate thing, he'd failed to die as the universe ended, and had gone through the beginning and end of the universe 36 times, collecting another 36 extra Kars and 37 Giotto space probes. So the world was repeating history in a very similar fashion. Was this what Nietzsche had named the eternal recurrence? The concept of history repeating itself, occurring in actual fact, over a substantially larger time span? Then it made far more sense to assume Tsukumajuku had come from a world in one of the previous 36 universes, and the discrepancies in the world map had been caused by the accumulated efforts of minor differences in the way history unfolded. Okay, so the Jorge Joestar Tsukumajuku had been friends with was a Jorge Joestar from one of those previous universes. And if Tsukumajuku was right, and that George had spelled his name Jorge, then differences in my own timeline had led to that name being applied 6 generations later to the Japanese boy adopted into the Joestar family, me, although my name was still officially spelled Joji. That seemed a bit forced. I mean, I was adopted, I thought. Similarities or differences might arise within history, but that was always within the Joestar bloodline. None of that had anything to do with an adopted son. But anyway, Dio Brando. I knew nothing about him at all. Kars, do you know what connection this Dio Brando has with the Joestar family? I was the detective, yet here I was asking someone else about my own memories. Oh well, maybe I wasn't a great detective. Given the current course of events, it seemed unlikely I'd ever end up gathering everyone connected to this place in one location and explaining my solution to them. Oblivious to my internal shame, Kars simply answered the question.
He was adopted by the Joestar family as Jojo Joestar. He died in a train accident in 1889.
Adopted? Just like me? Kars's mouth turned into a projector again, showing us. Ka-chunk! This time the picture moved, and Kars's ear turned into a speaker so he could hear. I hadn't heard Grandpa Joseph's voice in a while. I was a fidgety child, and the image rarely focused on him for long. I wasn't interested in his story. It was his bedroom, and I was sitting on Joseph Joestar's bed. He said, "My grandfather Jonathan was a hero. He died trying to stop his adopted brother from robbing a train. Dee was an even bigger piece of shit than my father. If they hadn't taken each other out, I'm sure Jonathan would have raised my father properly, and he'd have made this family even greater than we are." Dee must be Dio Brando. So detested, Joseph refused to even say his name aloud. But a train robbery? The Joestars were titled aristocrats, wealthy even by the standards of English citizens. What the hell happened? I could see why the Joestars would want to keep this history secret. But if he'd really died then, he couldn't have been in the sky over Cape Canaveral in 1999, throwing a metal plate at Poochie's house. When had Dio become a vampire? Once you become a vampire, you could hardly live in polite society. Then again, the kind of man who'd plan a train robbery probably didn't give a shit about polite society. Kars, you conquered sunlight using the stone mask with the red stone slotted into it, right? Are vampires also weak to sunlight? Shifting his mouth back to normal, Kars replied,
Of course, vampires can't last a second in sunlight. We, the species I once belonged to, could operate for a brief period of time in sunlight and could turn our bodies to soil or metal or burrow into rock and survive partial exposure to sunlight. I assume you're thinking about Dio Brando?
Yes, but
vampires have powers humans can only dream of. They can heal very quickly, have heightened senses and physical strength, but they don't have wings. They can't fly, but in the photo, he was hovering in the air without wings. In 1999, this Poochie fellow had not yet discovered his stand, and thus could not see it. But this vampire almost certainly has a stand or some similar power.
Yeah, and a vampire with that kind of power had waited 100 years to put some massive scheme in motion, making a fake way to heaven to get Poochie moving, sending him to Mars, or to lead Kars, the ultimate thing, back to Earth. Wait, I thought, and glanced at Kars, who was grinning at me.
It seems this lonely vampire has the nerve to take a run at me. He must be very confident in his stand's ability. I suppose it was a stroke of luck the astronauts who came to Mars were stand masters. That allowed me to learn about stands before returning to Earth. It appears stand powers can ignore the laws of physics, so he might have been able to drop me in a trap I could never have expected. He could perhaps have sent me out into space again without even touching me. But now I'm ready for him. When we reach Earth, I'll begin by conquering all stand masters,
Kars said, clearly enjoying himself. I remembered what Rohan had said. Stand masters find themselves drawn to one another like a magnetic attraction. I already knew of one place with a great number of stand masters. It was floating in the middle of the ocean. Morio and Nero Island. The two of them are currently overlapping, and the two islands were surrounded by the American army. He said if nothing changes, the American army will flip the island. The message given to Hiro's Koiji. Why was America trying to eliminate Morio? Did America somehow know that the ship with Kars on it wouldn't be landing there in 6 months, but 4 hours? The commander-in-chief of the American army was the president, the funniest Valentine. His father, Funny, had just tried to kill all the other astronauts on the dark side of Mars. That was clearly part of a strategy to grab Kars for their own devices. Had the H.G. Wells blowing up been scripted, and the plan B for Funnier to be like we were now, on a ship with Kars, quietly returned to Earth without the other nations knowing? If Funny Valentine had given Heroes that message because either he was in on his son and grandson's plan, or because he disagreed with it, that made a lot more sense. I was sure of it. America knew Kars was coming. They might not yet know that Funny had been blown up on Mars by Narancia, and might believe it was him on board this ship with Kars, but the army was waiting for this ship to land on Earth. And since he was the ultimate thing, it was safe to assume they'd be well prepared. A Stand Master like Funnier might survive it, but an ordinary citizen like me could easily die in the chaos. Crap! I ran over to Narancia, who was still bound to the ceiling, and grabbed the pebble phone out of his back pocket. I hit redial. Tomomomomomom, tomomom. At last Shiobana Haruno answered.
Yes?
Hello, I said in Japanese. This is Jorge Joestar.
Oh, what is it?
I was wondering what's going on down there.
I see, good timing. I needed to call you myself.
Did you find Diavolo?
No. About the state of affairs here. An hour ago, the American army ordered us to leave these waters. 30 minutes ago, they gave us a final warning. And a moment ago, an American Air Force scout plane inexplicably broke apart in the sky over Morio and crashed. Villagers went out to rescue them, clashed with naval forces and are now fighting. We expect they'll start bombing Morio and Nero Island any moment, so we've ordered all civilians from both islands to hide underneath Nero. But we still haven't figured out how to control it, so if it starts moving across Morio again, everyone will have to move along with it. Not ideal, but our best available option. We're continuing the hunt for this serial killer, Kira Yoshikage, but no likely suspects have been found, and once America attacks, the chaos will make continued investigation nigh impossible.
He rattled this all off calmly. But what? Fighting? Villagers and the Navy? Only Stand Masters stood any chance of fighting the Navy, but even then people without stands the world over would see the American soldiers aiming their guns at unarmed Japanese citizens. How is the international community allowing this? Bombing? The American attack? How is any of this insane crap happening? I could only assume all of this was being kept secret from the world at large. As if he'd guessed my reaction, Shiobana added,
They've told everyone that terrorists have taken over Morio and Nero Island, and that the villagers have been driven mad with a weaponized virus, and the terrorists made them attack the Japanese and American soldiers who came to rescue them. There are actual reports of patients in Sardinia and the Tohoku region of Japan going berserk and attacking people. Their symptoms are contagious and the number of victims is rising. It's like a zombie movie. The dead bite people, and those bit or who come in contact with their saliva turn and attack other humans. I suppose the key difference from the movies is that there are rumours of flying zombies. At any rate, the world is in a state of panic, and everyone believes Morio and Nero are the source of the epidemic. They've been told the island set out into the ocean so they can carry the zombie disease to other lands, and an International Emergency Safety Council meeting is being held to decide the fate of these two islands. Satellite weapons are already arranged above us, and we believe they'll be used to blow these islands away. We have to figure out a way to control these islands before that happens.
Zombies? Flying zombies? Since when did things like that exist? When I said nothing, Shiobana asked,
By the way, where are you in Narancia?
Outer space.
Huh? Could you put Narancia on?
Oh, sure, I said, and handed the phone up to Narancia, who immediately wailed, Giorno, it's me! God damn it, listen! And with tears running down his cheeks, he began explaining everything that had happened. I staggered a few steps away and saw Kars grinning at me. It's possible the Stand Masters you want to conquer are about to be wiped out, I said. Although that might well not happen. Stand powers are pretty amazing after all. They might well be able to withstand the American army's attack. But I was worried. Kars chuckled.
If you're worried, then you'd better save them.
Could he read my mind too? If I could do that, this would all be easy.
Have you actually thought to see if there's anything you can do? Human minds move so slowly, and you lack perseverance. Always giving up so easy.
What? I wasn't a stand master. I was an ordinary human. I opened my mouth to say as much, but thought better of it. Kars wouldn't say something like that unless he already had an answer in mind. In other words, Kars knew there was something I could do. There was something I could do, I just hadn't noticed yet. I would if I thought about it. If my reason for being helpless was that I was an ordinary human, then I needed to do something about that. I just meant I wasn't the ultimate thing or a stand master, but I just had to change that. I could change that. Behind Kars, Enrico Pucci was lying on the floor, still badly hurt and breathing ragged. He was glowering at outer space, deep in thought. His stand. White snake. 2 discs. It could take out a stand power, the same as reading the memory discs. If you stuck a stand disc in your head, would that make me be able to use the stand like we'd just been reading memories? Kars, I said, can I borrow the disc of your stand power? Kars laughed out loud.
Bold move, Jorge Joestar. I thought you were going to ask for my help, but you prefer to do something yourself.
Eh? Oh, was that all? If he was willing to do it for me, then by all means. But Kars was sure a White Snake was already out, and pulling 2 discs out of Kars' head. White Snake and Dust Boot. But White Snake was still standing behind Kars. Huh? I thought.
It's a copy,
Kars said. He really could do anything, I thought, and took the discs from him. I shoved one of them into my head. As I did, Kars said,
But can a mere human use my power?
Oh shit, I thought, and everything went black. I'd exploded. I'd literally exploded, and there were still bits of gore dripping off the ship walls, and Arancha on the ceiling and Poochie on the floor were both gaping at me, covered in blood. But my body was back to normal, totally uninjured. Kars was still laughing.
You really don't think things through,
he said. The discs were in his hand, so he must have taken them out of my head, but he put my body back together before I died. I guess the ultimate thing viewed me as a sort of flesh doll made of bits of bone and blood that he could easily put back together again if anything happened. I was rather grateful he'd let me survive my careless death. Thanks, Kars. Can I ask how? I'm pretty sure I was totally dead there.
Flesh is a vessel, and the soul is like ice cream inside. If the vessel breaks, the soul momentarily retains its form. I merely reassembled the vessel before the soul melted away.
I think we just casually answered the question, what is life?
That was never a question.
Okay, but was my ice cream okay? Didn't spill any?
I do not fail, and I've already removed the 36 souls from the extra me's, so I have experience. But my experience also tells me you've already died a number of times.
Huh?
If we extend the ice cream analogy, if you melt ice cream and refreeze it, it doesn't quite taste the same as it did. The texture changes. Understood?
Yeah.
It's exactly like that.
So I felt like I was dying? Several different times?
And your emotional reaction to that damages your soul. I suppose it's possible.
When you turned the extra cars into fuel and ship parts, did their feelings damage their souls?
I sense nothing like that. The extra me's gave me their lives, and I simply took them.
Oh, okay. There's no point in arguing amongst yourself?
We are the ultimate thing, and there is no discord among us. We all understand everything, and I did not throw out the souls I removed. They now form a part of me.
Did you lick them like ice cream, eating them?
The ice cream is a metaphor, fool. Are you really human? What happened to your ability to make sense of things?
You sure are smart, Kars.
You're merely far too stupid. I can't believe you've descended from that crafty Joseph Joestar.
Well, I am adopted, but I let that be. Grandpa Joseph had definitely taught me a lot. I'd grown up in the Joestar household, so this was pathetic. I was supposed to be a detective, but he kept saying I wasn't thinking enough and was being far too stupid, and he was absolutely right about it. My mind was starting to clear. I have to do better, I said, mostly to myself. Blood was pumping through my brain. I'm Jorge Joestar, the detective Jojo. So I had to think, damn it. The situation was so oppressive my brain was withering and not working properly. Do your job, brain! Everything about this mess was beyond anything I'd previously experienced. But I'd always been surprised by all kinds of things before. I'd always overcome surprise and new experiences by thinking really hard. If I was really a detective, then I'd outwit this case too. Even if I couldn't believe in myself, I had faith in my wits. You're right, Kars, I said. I remember who I am. Kars was watching me intently. I think deeper and broader than anyone else around.
That's right,
Kars said.
But do you really understand the true nature of what Sukumajuku called the Beyond?
I truly believe there is meaning in my meeting you like this. Sukumajuku had smiled. Everything has meaning. Of course there was meaning in the fact that I'd met Kars here. Even someone as overwhelming as him was a necessary element for me to perform my role as detective. I nodded. You're cool with that? Kars smiled.
I have no desire to be the leading man.
Kars was completely down with the theme Sukumajuku had brought us. His intelligence was blinding, and thanks to Kars I was finally emotionally ready to step into the gears of the world, with a healthy clank. I had Kars prepare a reduced power version of the stand discs for me, and placed one in my head. I first inserted a small-sized version of Das Boot, Kars edition, and found the second disc wouldn't go in. Rohan had mentioned that there was a rule, only one stand per person. Obviously Kars was the exception, but that was fine. Das Boot was more useful to me than White Snake at the moment. Kars, how long till we reach Earth?
Another 15 minutes.
Huh? We're that close already.
And it seems I've run out of time to eat you all. But I wasn't bored. Don't worry. There'll be plenty of food back on Earth.
I really wasn't worried. How did our 6-month journey turn into 4 hours?
I don't completely understand it myself, but it seems this astronaut stand has some effect on the flow of time.
White Snake did. It didn't just take standard memory discs? Whatever. Kars, how much fuel do we have left?
As calculated. Just enough.
We'll slow down before entry, right? Can we let some of it outside the ship for a moment when that happens?
For a moment, yes. Do as you please.
But that fuel was extra Kars, wasn't it? As I thought that, Kars said,
One always rules all. The other me's know that.
That's why the other 36 didn't hesitate to let original Kars turn them into fuel and spaceship parts. I looked up at Narancia, who was still gaping at me, the pebble phone forgotten in his hand. He hang up already? Huh? Ah! He quickly put it to his ear again. Tch! He hung up! You had to go and blow up all of a sudden. Scared the shit out of me. You okay, dude? Sorry, I'm fine. You're fine, my ass. Jesus. Narancia, the American army's about to attack Morio and Nero Island. I'd like to prevent that. Yeah, that's boot, right? Run out on the Kars fuel and boom, boom, boom. Let's do this shit. As out of it as he'd seemed, he was clearly following along perfectly well. He wasn't a ranking gangster for nothing. We're almost at Earth. We're still alive. The tough part's still ahead. I turned to Kars. Can you let Narancia down? Kars waved a hand and Narancia was released. Woohoo! Freedom! I turned to the only actual astronaut on the ship. Poochie, we're almost at Earth.
Yeah.
He staggered to his feet and moved to the pilot seat. He picked up the comm device made from bits of the Jotos, glanced back at Kars a minute, and opened the channel.
Houston, this is Lieutenant Enrico Pucci. Houston, do you read me?
There was a crackle over the radio, and an answer.
This is Houston. This is Pucci, you said? Why are you transmitting on Joto's frequency?
Because I'm on the Giorno.
Who's with you? Where's Funnier?
Funnier's dead. Soundman and Pocoloco too. Funnier killed them. Tell the president there will be an accounting for this crime.
Calm down, Pucci.
I've never been more calm in my life.
Where's Kars?
He's here.
Okay, we've just pinpointed your location. That isn't just one Giotto you're on. We've got the size fit on our monitors. It's big and fast, like something out of Star Wars. Are you controlling that alone?
I don't need to control anything. This thing is made from Kars' own flesh. Tell us the plan to get back to you.
Okay. Ready to hear it?
The only reason they had a plan that fast is if they'd already prepared it a long time ago. They were ready for anything. The only difference was the passengers involved. As Poochie and the NASA director hashed out the details, we got closer to Earth. It was growing visibly larger outside our window. Ha! Ha ha ha! Earth! Naranchi yelled, slapping me on the shoulder. We're home, buddy! We're home. I was relieved as well, but now he had to fight. Kars was looking at Earth, surprised by the vast expanse of blue.
This is the Earth. Why is there less land?
I wonder what the Earth looked like before the universe died 36 times. Then it occurred to me that maybe I already knew, and I showed Kars the world map Sukamajuku and I had exchanged.
This is the world I knew,
Kars said. Sukamajuku had come from the same universe as original Kars. It all connected. What you're seeing now is the ocean. Panlandia just happens to be on the other side of the planet at the moment.
It's like a water vessel,
Kars said. There was a thunk behind us, and I turned to find Poochie staring at Kars. Was he stunned or exalted? He looked as if he'd been so surprised he was about to start laughing. What was he thinking? The spaceship slowed down, and Kars moved over to the pilot seat, stopped Poochie's headset, and said,
Lord Kars is ready to return. Is the party ready?
The fact that Kars appeared to be excited made him extra frightening, and Arancha and I both got very quiet. He tossed the headset back to Poochie and turned to us.
Apparently we can see our landing site from the window right now. There are 2 islands stacked on top of each other, crossing the ocean, and they're in our way, so they're going to get rid of them.
Naranch and I both went to the window and stared down at the round ball of water. The ocean was vast, and Morio and Nero Island were too small and too far for our human eyes to make out. I can't see! I can't see! Narancha yelped. So Kars came up behind him, pushed his fingers into the back of his head, pressed a switch somewhere in his head and adjusted his vision. Narancha immediately said, Oh, there it is. I can see it. Shit, shit, shit. There's smoke and fire everywhere. What the fuck? It's like a goddamn war zone. Kars, I said. The fuel, please. Kars pulled his hand out of Narancha's head and nodded. Black liquid began bubbling out of the ship outside the window. Living fuel, heading towards Earth. Narancha, let's do this. Support fire for Morio and Nero Island. Oh yeah! Come on, George! Kill the fuck out of anyone threatening my gang! I grabbed the pebble phone and called Chiabana. Hello? It's Jorge Joestar. We're in orbit. We're going to fire some missiles down at the Americans, so make sure the villagers and islanders are out of the way. And the Standmasters. Ordinary citizens already evacuated. All Standmasters will be under Nero Island in the next few minutes. Fire away. Roger. But please, try to save as many American wounded as possible. Naturally. Fortunately, there are no injured parties from either island yet, so the people are still amenable. Good. Commencing attack. Roger. Thanks. I hung up and turned to Narancha. Heard that? We aren't killing them. We're disabling their weaponry. Your boss agrees. Fuck it then, Narancha grumbled. He pulled out his headset periscope, so I pulled my own out too. It was just as Kars said. I didn't know the specifics of the full range of abilities, but I instinctively knew how to control Das Boot. Let's fucking go, George! Narancha yelled. Fuck yeah! I shouted back. Come on, Narancha! Rock and roll! Dive, dive, dive! Our dust boot surfaced outside the ship, running across the surface of the ejected fuel, leaving 1 or 2 ships inside ourselves, just in case. We both gathered our fleets into one giant submarine each, firing very big missiles. All gates open! Narancha ordered. I opened the hatches on every torpedo and cruise missile I had. I'm going for the units on the east. You go for the west, George! I checked my targets in the periscope. All locked on. All missiles ready, I said. Fire! Narancha screamed. I did. Book sound effects, not mine. 24 torpedoes spread across the fuel, and 32 cruise missiles were headed up into space, and every single one of them headed straight for the Earth. They entered the atmosphere. Real missiles would have burned up on re-entry like meteors, but Stans didn't care about physics. They shot towards the 2 islands at almost exactly the same speed as they'd moved through outer space.
Boom, 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 boom. We hit every helicopter and battle shield the Navy had posted around Morio all at once. We hadn't armed the detonators, so none of them exploded. We just needed to defang them. Fucking boring, Narancia moaned. We fired a second wave. This one hit the landing craft as they approached the shore, and the ship stationed in the harbour. Boom, 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 boom. Once again, no explosions, just robbing the sinks of the ships of their military capabilities. Oh shit, one's about to sink, Narancia chuckled. Knock that off. Shobana promised Pashon people would help the rescue efforts. Heh? Don't let Giorno know, George. We're about to start our descent, Pucci said, interrupting our celebration. Pull your stads back. The ship had been moving towards re-entry this whole time, so while we'd been looking through the periscopes, we moved quite far away from Morio and Nero Island, and the two islands had vanished over the crest of the planet. One more! Narancia yelled, and as his dust boot retreated, it fired a hail of missiles at the satellite weapons. Boom! These exploded. When I looked shocked, Narancia shrugged. What? They're unmanned. Having that shit up in space is scary. But now they were space debris, and that would cause problems later. But for now, fuck it. Our dust boots rejoined the ship, and we controlled orbiting the Earth, gradually descending. Brace yourselves, Pucci said. We're going in. Not that he was controlling the ship or anything. Let's go, I said. Narancia joined in. Go! Back to Earth! Just before we hit the atmosphere, the pebble phone rang. Narancia answered. Ah? What? Boots ready? Now's not a good time. The ship was starting to shake, but all of the racket I could just make out the voice on the other end of the line. We found the bodies of Diavolo and Morio's serial killer, Kira Yoshikage, together. Somebody took both of them out. We don't know anymore yet. Huh? Kira Yoshikage? They'd been taken out. So Diavolo and Kira were both dead? Already? Both of them. A mafia boss and a serial killer. Wasn't that good news? I thought, but no, it wasn't. Diavolo and Kira were, in theory, the ones moving the islands. If they were both dead, neither one of them could move, and the ship with us and Kars on it was falling, and standmasters are drawn together. Standmasters are drawn together. I shouted at the pebble phone in Narancia's hand. Tell everyone on the island to run for it! A spaceship's about to crash on top of them! But the phone hung up, and I wasn't sure if he'd heard me or not. Narancia and I looked at each other. We might survive landing in the water, but we'd almost certainly die if we crashed into land. The ship was wrapped in fire, and the extra cars were burning up, vanishing without so much as a scream. To slow our descent, we spread our wings, and by the time we were through the crowds, the fire had vanished, and we could see Nero Island and Morio at the front window. Nero Island was standing on 6 legs on top of Morio. This was where we died, but Kars would probably survive. Sorry, Narancia, I said. You would never have gone to Mars if you weren't with me. Tsukumajuku had brought both of us, and it did have meaning. Thanks, I said. If you hadn't been there, I'd never have seen the Earth again. Tears in his eyes, Narancia said. You gotta make a big deal about it? I hate sappy shit. I laughed, closed my eyes, and wondered who I should be thinking of in my last moments. But inside my brain just started jumping from Tsukumajuku's arrival to entering Morio to going to Mars, leaping randomly around different scenes from this adventure, and I found myself mildly impressed by how amazing it had all been. I opened my eyes long enough to confirm that the ship was definitely headed directly at Morio. Pucci was watching the same scene through the other window. So this is the rhinoceros beetle, he said. Our ship was headed right for the Arrow Cross house, and when he saw the ship off the roof, Pucci cried out happily, And that's the Via Dolorosa! Rhinoceros beetle. Via Dolorosa. Those were 2 of the 14 words carved into the back of the Giotto plate. Via Dolorosa equals the way of suffering, the last road Jesus Christ walked, dragged past the townsfolk, carrying his cross on his back. It was also called the Via Crucis, the way of the cross. As we were falling upside down, the Arrow Cross was at our backs, and the spaceship with us and Kars on it crashed directly into the Arrow Cross, and the shock of the impact knocked Nero off Morio, and flipped Morio upside down. And as if there had always been another upside down island underneath Morio, where Morio flipped, another island rose from the sea. A massive island,
900 times the size of Moriel. That forced the water out away from it. But the American battleships and aircraft carriers were just rocked a little, the wave passing without further incident. The 219,850 kilometre square island that appeared out of nowhere was one no one in our world had ever heard of. Great Britain. The mythical England. When I'd stepped off the train in Moriel and looked at the map of the town, it had seemed familiar. Just before we hit, I'd seen it from the sky and remembered that feeling. Had I been here before? That was all in my head. I'd just been remembering the map of the world Sukumajuku had drawn for me and recognised the shape of England. But since it had been backwards, I hadn't recognised it. I hate saying that I'm only human, but I clearly had to work on my observation skills. If I'd worked harder, maybe I'd have survived. End of chapter 12. Don't worry, guys. Joji's still alive. There's still like 4 chapters left of the book. So, I mean, I wouldn't just kill him off. Whatever.